Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Chris Hoff, host of the Radical Therapist podcast and YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Before we get started, please click subscribe, comment, and share, and it would be much appreciated. Today is Super Bowl Sunday, so I thought I would do something on sports psychology. And I know you're thinking, Chris, sports psychology? Yes, I actually know what it's like to win championships in team sports. I know what it's like to lose championships in team sports. And I can even share, I know what it's like to struggle with the nerves before competition. My first surfing competition I ever entered, I forgot to put my leash on my leg, the leash of the board on my leg. Big mistake. So I know how these things can affect us. So so I thought Super Bowl Sunday, we got March Madness coming up in the States, and of course my favorite sport, spring training is just around the corner in baseball. So I thought I'd do a little sports psychology thing, and I'm going to use an article by, I don't know if you can read it, Jim Denson and John Winslade. It's an older article, but it's titled Understanding Problematic Sporting Stories, Narrative Therapy, and Applied Sports Psychology as my guide. And I'm also going to reference Christina Douglas a little bit. She wrote a paper, I think it's titled, and I'll try to link it in the show notes, Storying Myself. She's a narrative researcher in England, actually won a golf masters and competed at the highest level in golf, and really wrote a great article about the dominant pressures of the dominant narratives, performance narratives, which we're going to take on today. So, what we're going to talk about today is the dominant performance narratives, which describe, and I think all know what those are: sacrifice, dedication, discipline. Those are kind of the dominant narratives that are prescribed for success in sport. But this video, we're going to be examining those narratives and their potential damaging effects on identity development, performance, psychological well-being, and we're going to look at how narrative therapy might enable athletes to reclaim control over their performance practices and eliminate problem stories undermining their performance. So what are some of the dominant approaches when an athlete finds themselves struggling with performance? So typically, I think sports psychologists, coaches, etc., are kind of operating with and there might be more than these, but some of the following four interventions, I think, are typically the dominant interventions done by sports psychologists. And the first one is goal setting as a motivational tool. Goal setting as a motivational tool. And this presumes that athletes should appreciate that achievement is a do-it-yourself process. Motivation is an event that transpires within the individual rather than an interaction with others, and that goal setting is the greatest motivational tool available to them. The second kind of intervention is dealing with anxieties through relaxation. I know we all know there's tons of meditation, mindfulness apps now. Mindfulness is all the rage. And I think part of it is, and I think the sporting community is actually adopting a lot of these strategies. But dealing with anxieties through relaxation, athletes must assume responsibility for keeping their mental arousal levels within manageable limits. This is what Denison and Winslade are arguing. And three, confidence through concentration. Effective concentration includes being in the here and now, selective attention to critical cues, and focus on one thing at critical times. You see this a lot now in the idea of flow. And some of these, flow is, I think, the primary one. How do people, not just athletes, writers, creatives, etc., get into that state of flow? And it's this idea of kind of confidence through concentration. As somebody who surfs, that experience of like when it's just you on the wave kind of thing. And then finally, the fourth kind of dominant coaching strategy when somebody's struggling athletically is imagery training for performance enhancement. The more athletes use and control their imagination to help them reach their goals, the more likely they will be to actually achieve those goals. And I'm thinking of a story off often repeated story of Wayne Gretzky. He used to play for the Kings hockey here in LA, who story gets repeated over and over. I hear it all the time of how he just imagines the goal or the puck going into the goal no matter what, just keeps imagining that. And I think a lot of people have adopted that same kind of perspective. And so imagery training for performance enhancement is a big deal. And I know they tried to do it at being in LA or near LA, and being a Lakers fan. I know they tried to use that a lot with Shaq, who had a hard time making free throw shots. Didn't seem to work really well for Shaq, but they still try it. So anyway, so how might the narrative orientation provide sports psychologists with a different set of assumptions and practices that might enable athletes to feel their own experiences, stories are invaluable for understanding? So in the article of Winslades and Dennison's article, they used an example of burnout and how that, oftentimes athletes, one of the common things that comes up, especially if you've been spending a lifetime in high performance and high practice and just dedicated time to something. Oftentimes some struggle gets often characterized as burnout, and how that implies a deficit in the individual's management of self. It sets in a place of assumptions which guides us to how to go on and fix them. And if a narrative approach might start with a different linguistic frame, different languaging of how we might language that to describe burnout, such as external pressure. And this may, just that simple kind of linguistic frame, that switch of linguistic frame, may lead to a new set of thoughts about the nature of burnout, locating it in discursive interactions. Once again, those dominant narratives of give everything to your sport kind of thing. And maybe even around training, like you've got to do it every day, all those kinds of things. But when you do that, kind of switch that linguistic frame, it brings maybe some of those discourses that are in play, makes them more visible and easier to work with when you're working with somebody. So, and then you may go on to correct it in a different way, and it won't individualize the problem, but we'll be able to see some of the influences on the athlete, right? So, and this is important because narrative therapists attend very closely to the way people speak about themselves and thus produce themselves. Language creates reality, right? And so we're very interested in how that language is being used. So in beginning a conversation with an athlete, the sports psychologist might, from a narrative frame, might pay much greater attention to the way in which the problem is described and to the discourse in which it fits in describing it. The example may be the idea of this is a discourse that Winslade and Dennison use, that all good athletes are obedient and focus all their attention on their sport. I'm sure we've all heard that one, right? Or in the case of an athlete, this is probably a common problem we run into, in the case of an athlete who considers themselves unfit and out of shape because they have gained some weight, maybe the search for richer descriptions may go beyond the person's eating and training routines to include influences of body magazine articles, body product advertisements, social media, all that stuff that kind of affects the way people view themselves. So that externalizing that happens. So next, a richer description of the problem might be undertaken. The problem might be located in the culturally available stories in the person's life or within their community context. In this way, by naming the problem, the athlete can be invited to position or name their problem in a way that kind of takes on the dominant theories of sports psychology. The voice of the athlete is then brought forward, and their own meaning making about what might be going on is brought forward, and it avoids kind of these ready-made dominant descriptions of what might be happening, in other words, the grand narratives of sports psychology, right? Which include, again, sacrifice, dedication, discipline, and an overriding focus on winning as prerequisites for success in sport. And we can all identify, I think, or are familiar with those discourses. So what's the next task? The next task of the sports psychologist and the athlete might work together on is that of discovering possibly underused, unnoticed local knowledge or insider knowledge of how to address a problem that might already lie in the athlete's existing experience. This is where narrative therapy's unique outcomes come in, right? And so in searching for these unique outcomes, narrative therapists believe that the power to heal what troubles the athlete exists within their knowledge of their own lived experience, rather than the objective knowledge of a coaching manual, for example, right? And so these unique outcomes could take many different ways. So oftentimes these dominant narratives will subjugate, or narrative therapists would say subjugate, or blind people to actual lived experience. Like maybe I think Winsley and Dennison used the example of an athlete that used to practice on their own and had their own way of practicing, and that's how they became very successful, right? And so reintroducing people to some of these this actual lived experience that produced success for them on their own terms and in their own way of working, right? So just to kind of recap, it's about how do we make visible some of the external, using that linguistic frame switch, some of the external influences that are affecting the athlete. How do we help the athlete name the problem as they would name it? And in that effort, that allows us maybe access to that externalizing allows us access to maybe begin to see some of the ways that, or access some of the ways that they have their actual lived experience of getting around that problem in the past, those unique outcomes, and just maybe asking them what they know about their body, what they know about their preferences, about how they want to go about being successful, and just kind of accessing that experience, and then helping them bring those forward more richly in the face of these dominant sporting narratives that can be very kind of damaging to people's identities, psychological well-being, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I'm not trying to say that all sports psychology is bad or useless or anything like that. I'm just saying that I think narrative practice can bring something to the table, so to speak, as a way of looking at these things differently and kind of escaping these dominant ways of being in sports psychology at the moment. So hopefully that was helpful. I will link the articles in the show notes, and I would check out Katrina Douglas's article, her narrative work around sporting, her own experience of sports and being involved in sports, struggling with the dominant narratives, and also holding on to her own identity preferences. Really powerful. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe, comment, share. If you have any questions about this, just reach out to me. And remember, The Radical Therapist is all over social media. Come find us. And I hope you enjoy Super Bowl Sunday. Thanks for watching.